Hello, hello, and welcome
Hello.
to this fascinating talk today with Chelsey Sarah Prusha, who is a clinical hypnotherapist, founder and creator of Multidimensional Hypnotherapy and Rainbow Reiki healing modality. Chelsey is a fascinating person altogether. So thank you so much, Chelsey, for joining us today on the interview series of Living Your Soul Purpose, because probably you are one of the best examples and most fascinating examples of what it takes to be living your soul purpose. And I will never forget the way we met. We were both members of the same hypnotherapy community as we studied the same hypnotherapy modality, one of the many. And we started exchanging messages, and we were keeping it all very professional and very serious. And you were telling me about your studies in metaphysical sciences, which sounded very interesting for me, and theocentric psychology. And for me, being fascinated with transpersonal psychology, that was all very intriguing. And at some point, I just couldn't resist keeping that very serious, very professional tone of the conversation. And I just burst out, why do I sense such an intense Mary Magdalene energy about you? And I think everything started from there. The rest is history. So welcome, Chelsey. The floor is yours. Tell us, who is Chelsey Sarah Prusha, who has such an intense Mary Magdalene energy about her?
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. So yeah, when we met, it was very professional and keeping it, you know, P's and Q's and professionalism and, maybe a little ego rooted in it. But the minute you opened up with that question there, like you said, it was history. So, um, a little backstory about me. I did not get into this helping profession by choice per se. I was kind of universally pushed into it is a good way of putting it. My formative kind of early teenage years work history started in the healthcare field. I worked in healthcare in the westernized medicine, anywhere from the hospital setting of intense like medical, surgical, ICU care. Went on to work into nursing homes, doing long term care, more hospice type work, and then kind of ended my medical field career working in dialysis and people with kidney and renal failure. Um, and then from there, I went on to pursue nursing. I studied nursing for 3 years. And then at that point, I dropped out of the nursing program because I came to realize um, what nursing is in our society today is not actually what I wanted. I really enjoyed the patient care, the client patient, provider relationship. And nursing is much more pushing pills and documenting stuff on the computer. So it's so much more technology rooted and not patient centered the way it was back when Florence Nightingale was doing nursing. So um, at that time, I dropped out of nursing school, continued just working in healthcare. And then at around the time COVID hit, I stepped out of the healthcare field altogether. I opened an in home daycare because I had 3 small children at home and I didn't want to miss out on time with them anymore. And in opening the in home daycare, business soared for me because I was able to take on all of these healthcare providers' kids because a lot of the daycares were closing and I wasn't scared per se. I'd worked in medicine. So um, that was really foundational in that I got really bored really fast. It was really exciting building the daycare business. And then I didn't have the drive of using my intellectual brain anymore. It was so autopilot. And so I got bored and I ended up joining Beachbody as a health and wellness coach. Um, and from there, that led into me pursuing other means of helping people. I grew my Beachbody business in 4 months to the top 2% of the company. And then what I noticed started happening is the clientele that I built up, or the team I built up, it'd be really successful. And then all of a sudden they'd all drop off. And I couldn't figure out like what's happening. They were doing so good and now they're not. And that took me down the road of learning about the subconscious mind and understanding what was happening on that mental level as to why they were self-sabotaging and it wasn't working. So from there, I ended up finding RTT when I was researching the credentials of the business coach I was working with. And RTT fascinated me, and I dove headfirst into RTT. Um, about a month after starting the school, my mother died. And that was the catalyst of my spiritual awakening. I didn't know it at the time. But after she had passed, I started having more and more spiritual experiences. And at that point, I was just chalking it up to coincidence or, you know, who knows. So that then led to completing my RTT training. When I was at the lives for that, one of our fellow RTT therapists had pulled me aside, and she recognized that I was kind of struggling in the environment of all the people. And she had mentioned to me, asked me to go to lunch, and I went to lunch with her, and she said, you know, do you think maybe you might have autism? And for me at that time, I was like, no, you know, because I was so stigmatized in what autism was portrayed as. Um, After the lives completed, I stayed in contact with her. She got me in connection with one of her colleagues that specializes in working only with autism. And so I made that point of contact with her. We built a friendship and a working relationship. She helped me understand autism, provided me with different assessments and tests and stuff to help solidify my understanding of it. And at that point, I went into complete hyperfixation of learning everything I could about autism, which then led into neurodiversity. Um, at that point in life, my daughter was 2 already at that time, and she had already received a diagnosis of ADHD. So we were already kind of learning about neurodiversity. But then when I realized that I had autism, I went down that deep dive. And in doing that, I took every course, every class, every training, every book, everything I could get my hands on about neurodiversity, and really became a master at understanding it for the purpose of understanding myself. You know, growing up, life was very challenging for me. I was incredibly misunderstood. And now I recognize that I would be what's considered twice gifted. So I have a high intellectual intelligence plus some ADHD tendencies that completely masked my autism. But the struggles of autism were still there. They were just so deeply hidden. But in that process, I ended up getting a diagnosis of complex trauma. And in healing all of that, I became aware of kind of the medical gaslighting I had experienced, the school system, you know, kind of failing and dropping the ball with me and not understanding. And then, you know, that led into teenage rebellion and a lot of challenges and difficulties, and going through a process of being kind of a medical guinea pig. And well, med doesn't work. Let's try this. And then in my studies of learning about neurodiversity, coming to understand that people that are neurodivergent metabolize food and drugs differently than neurotypical people who these drugs are normally studied on. So I went through the gamut of every kind of psych med out there, the trial and error method, and had adverse reactions to the extreme. The most kind of profound adverse reaction I had was I ended up getting serotonin syndrome and hospitalized for about a week. If you're not familiar with serotonin syndrome, it's too much serotonin being produced by the body, causing extreme tremors, hallucinations, a high fever, and then kind of the next step after that high fever is body shutdown and death. My fever and tremors got to the point that I could not walk, I could not speak because my jaw was trembling so much. Fever got to 104, and ended up in the ICU. The treatment approach for that was to provide me with benzodiazepines to help regulate the system, which then I had an adverse reaction to those. And, the benzos should calm you down. And it did the complete opposite. And my heart rate skyrocketed. It was up to 160. I couldn't sit still. I was manic, essentially. So from there, I got transferred to the larger hospital in my state that I live in, and, really struggled with a lot of stuff. So my learning about neurodiversity was ultimately in order to understand myself in a way that nobody could understand me. As I started learning it, I started noticing, more and more traits and characteristics in my kids. And, then reflecting back when I did daycare, my children were always a little bit different than the daycare kids that I was, taking care of, in the way that they played and the way that they interacted with others. Um, so once I got to that kind of acceptance stage of me and myself and the children being neurodivergent, it kind of dawned on me, you have all of this knowledge and understanding and you're not doing anything with it. It's, you are put in so much time and money and energy and effort into it. And then I felt as if I was doing a disservice to humanity. And through kind of all of that healing process, to circle back a little bit to the Mary Magdalene energy, before I had done my training in hypnotherapy, I had worked with a hypnotherapist and had radical transformations and understanding of myself. And from there too, I didn't want to have to pay somebody every couple weeks to do sessions for me when I could learn to do it myself and do my own sessions. So that was part of why I pursued that as well. And yeah, so after I got done with that training, I started school, got additional certifications, and then um, as anybody kind of in that helping field, once you start networking with people, you're doing session exchanges. And um, I was going through that process, and it really started shifting because I would be going into a session with a colleague to work on something of my own. And as we're doing a session, I would start getting spiritual insight, information of them, deceased loved ones of theirs coming to me and relaying information to me to tell them. It happened once, and then all of a sudden it was happening every single time. So it got to the point that I was just stopped, because obviously I'm not getting any benefit of actually working through my own stuff, because here's spirit coming and, I'm helping these other people while I'm in trance, and they're supposed to be working on me, so to speak. So then I started, looking into learning things more about spirituality. And my first kind of encounter, I wasn't raised religious per se, but I was raised in the Midwest conservative state in the United States. So religious doctrines are in the consciousness. So I had to go through immense religious trauma healing, because of my lifestyle. I consider myself a lesbian. And as a result of that, I was inherently not good. There's something wrong with me. I was kind of condemned to hell from the moment I took my first breath, so to speak, is the mentality I held about myself subconsciously. So in working through that religious trauma, I started having experiences where I went through a rebirthing process in one of my hypnotherapy sessions. And in that, I could sense the presence of Jesus. And, I knew it was his energy because I came in contact with it before. And so I'd asked, then there was this other energy that I recognized and I felt very deeply connected and comforted by, but I didn't know what it was. So in that session, I remember I just asked, the energy of Jesus. And I said, who is this? Who's holding, my right hand? And he said, Mary Magdalene. And I, at that time, had no clue. And I remember asking the hypnotherapist that was facilitating for me, I said, who is Mary Magdalene? And, I'm sure she knew, but she just Googled the general, what the westernized world says about it. And she read it and said, it's the prostitute that Jesus cast 7 demons out of. And that was confusing for me because that's not the energy I felt by any means. It was the most nurturing, comforting energy. And I just remember in that session, I kept saying, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. And now understanding I wasn't wanting to be born. I didn't want to leave that space or safe container where I was surrounded by those energies. And they had instructed me and basically said, you're okay, we'll be with you always. And then went through the pre-birth process. And from there, that then kind of triggered the autistic hyperfixation, hyperfocus on learning everything about it. And, became aware of the Dead Sea Scrolls and more of the mystical, esoteric, Gnostic type teachings of Jesus. And um, then became fascinated with, you know, who Jesus really was, outside of the westernized organized religion lens that only talks about his birth and then the 3 years of his ministry. So there was such a huge gap in the education and knowledge about those formative years of his childhood, teenage, and young adult life. So went deep dove into studying that, and through that just became very familiar with my connection, and spiritually just expanded from there to the point where, you know, multidimensional beings, galactic type energies, master aspects started coming through. And, because of the religious trauma I had experienced, because I was pre-programmed to the belief that I was already going to hell, I didn't hold fear with any of this. So when anything came up that the world said was bad or dangerous or demonic, I was okay. And then I searched it and I learned about it because I wanted to understand. Again, a big neurodivergent trait and characteristic. Nevertheless, it brought me so much understanding. And from there, it really trickled into studying and learning a little bit about a lot of different religions, from Buddhism and Hinduism to, the Taoist mentality to Jainism and all sorts of different religions. Um, Even went into, learning about what Satanism and stuff is, and finding out that a lot of the stigma that all of these different religions hold, um, is it's faulty. It's not true stigma, because when you really study what they're teaching, there is a common theme and a common thread that transcends all of them. And so that then um, catapulted my, deeper understanding of what God truly is and how it's interconnected in everything, leading into me studying the more metaphysical science, quantum physics and quantum mechanics. Um, and then that led into where I am now in pursuing my degree and a doctorate in theocentric psychology. So yeah, that's kind of how we got here.
In a nutshell, the wounded healer journey, which is such a, I mean, this was an expression that was introduced by C.G. Jung, and it clearly is a mark of all of us who choose to become a healer or a therapist of any kind. And you are probably the other person other than me, that I know, that I'm aware of in my circle, that is so strong in bringing together science and research and the spiritual dimension of healing. And I have to say that, yeah, thanks to the autistic hyperfixation, you really are the master of details. I mean, absolute awe is the amount of knowledge that you have in terms of neurodivergence and all the subtle details that you are able to explain, and also to bring examples from your own experience, because and all that wealth of knowledge about nutrition and the relation between neurodivergence and nutrition and medical treatment, and how it affects differently neurodivergent people, and so on and so forth. I mean, you really are the example of someone who had to research because the medical system failed you, the educational system failed you, let alone the institutionalized religious system. And no surprise that you support other people with overcoming religious trauma. And you really needed to get to this understanding, this comprehensive understanding, not just by researching information and knowledge, but also going through it yourself. So you are the living, walking, talking proof of what it takes to be on the other side, of this a very shadowy journey, and you did it. And sometimes I wonder what does it take to be you. And no surprise that the healing modalities that you created they reflect you, because they are so multifaceted and so complex, and this is who you are. So tell us more about the healing modalities that you
Yeah.
are using and that you have created yourself.
It's before I go into that, it's kind of interesting that you had mentioned being failed by all of these systems. And when I look at my clientele list now, it makes sense to me now, and I can understand it now because my client list consists of chiropractors, doctors, functional medicine practitioners, nurses, religious leaders. I have pastors on my caseload, so all of those helpers that, the average, person goes to for support and healing and help. Those are the people that I'm helping. And so it makes sense to me now why none of them could actually help me, because I was always in that position where some part of me understood something in a way that they didn't. And, my work now reflects that. And I'm so thankful to have the relationship I have with you, because without that, there's such a small pool of people that, I can go to for help. And as any healer or therapist of any sort, helper, they have to have that support themselves. So, when you find those soul tribe people, you cling tight, because that's home. So yeah, as far as what I've created, um, the biggest thing. So I trained with the IACT community in order to become a certified master trainer for hypnotherapy. Um, when I trained in my hypnotherapy modality, which is a great modality, it has a lot of success. It does wonderful things. Um, it worked for me, except it did not include the spiritual education and understanding of energy, countertransference of emotions that I needed. So when I started working with clients, I was taking the training I had done and really following suit with the scientific process and the model and the westernized lens of it all. Um, and it didn't prepare me effectively to work with clients because of the sensitivity level that I possess. So when I went through the training to become a hypnotherapist trainer, I knew off the bat I can't teach just hypnotherapy. I have to have my students that I work with um, have the precursor foundational understanding of energy, of emotions, how it transfers, as a way to protect themselves and protect their clients. Because I started experiencing, you know, I would work with a client on an issue, and then all of a sudden that issue is coming home with me, and if they are experiencing physical pain in a certain spot, I'd go home and I'd have that pain. I didn't understand that my way in which I worked at the time was by alchemizing those energies and transmuting them. So I was just holding on to them. And then it'd come home, and then my very sensitive children would be having the same, behaviors and feelings and sensations. So I started learning about energy and emotion and that countertransference, implementing different techniques and tricks, learning about different elementals. And so in what I have created in my multidimensional hypnotherapy, um, we don't just look at the mind and subconscious reprogramming. We look at the person as a whole. We look at the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, all planes, and we dress all planes in a singular session. Um, in order to do that, though, my students have to be equipped with understanding energy and emotions, which led to the ultimate creation of Rainbow Reiki, which at some point down the line will probably get a new name, because including Reiki in there really makes it sound so much simpler than it is. And it is a very advanced healing modality that combines um, ancient Egyptian healing practices, which, for those that are unaware, Jesus himself studied in ancient Egypt, as well as learned from a Tibetan Buddhist teacher. Um, that's how he learned to do the wonderful, masterful healings that he did. It was the ancient Egyptian and Tibetan healing methods. So that I teach about ancient Egyptian healing, Tibetan healing. I go into teaching what's known as shadow Reiki, which is working with the shadow aspect of self. Um, it incorporates ancient Magdalene energy healing practices, as well as Arcturian and Pleiadian healing technologies, um, true technologies that we have access to here in our modern day world, as well as some of the human brain technologies and the capacity that our own brain possesses. So I combined kind of all of those modalities plus the education and understanding of sensitivity and neurodiversity and created the Rainbow Reiki as truly a comprehensive, rooted in ancient wisdom, backed by modern technology and science healing modality so that, practitioners can protect themselves and truly support and help their clients to heal and overcome their issues. And then that then leads into the multidimensional hypnotherapy training. The way like I said, have it structured, they have to have the Rainbow Reiki energy healing as that prerequisite. And then we go into teaching the multidimensional hypnotherapy process that I created, which is a little bit different than many other hypnotherapy approaches where, you identify the problem, you implement positive suggestions, and the subconscious mind can override that problem. It's different than that. And we look at the patterning in the way in which the brain thinks, focusing on those thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and actions, going through regression, and then identifying those different parts of self, kind of similar to, the internal family system with more of a spiritual spin on it. The multidimensional healing as well then goes into, as you proceed through the session, looking at past life connections, ancestral and generational connections, looking at soul level karmic wounds that these problems people are facing are rooted in. If we just address the physical this life, there may be mild improvements, but people aren't getting the full transformation they're seeking because that problem is actually rooted way further back than that. So the multidimensional hypnotherapy really encompasses, your day-to-day life issues connected to and bridging to those past life experiences, resulting in a true kind of miraculous healing. And then kind of at the end of that process, I invoke the spiritual support team of all of my clients. We connect with their team. We establish that baseline communication, begin learning how to connect with their spiritual support team, what role the members play in their life, how they can call upon them. And then we go forward a little bit more into identifying the oversoul of each client and what that means for them. How does being a part of this oversoul affect your reality? And so that's kind of a little bit of what multidimensional hypnotherapy is. The combination of those two, I started teaching it and I realized it's much more comprehensive than just a 6 to 9 month course. So I'm currently kind of going through a remodel of the whole program, and I'm transitioning it to what's known as Trinity Wellness Therapy. So through that process and program, students or practitioners will learn, everything that those two things incorporate. Plus, I have 18 other classes that are in development that will be incorporated in that, which span from the most westernized education model of, the physical body, the, organ systems, to nutrition, to the more esoteric kind of Gnostic type teachings about the Essenes, to, Lemuria and Atlantis, weaving into dark goddesses and understanding shadow aspects, to understanding the origins of the tarot, all sorts of different things. So the Trinity Wellness Therapy, it incorporates that mind, body, spirit across all planes, from the most basic side of the educational field to the most advanced and extreme. So,
and I find it really fascinating because what you mentioned earlier about coming back home after working with clients and coming back home with psychosomatic symptoms that at first were really worrying to you. And I remember discussing about it, and It's so fascinating how it all goes back to ancient shamanic traditions, because what the shamans do, exactly what you were doing, serving the same purpose, alchemizing those illnesses through their own body and through their own energetic field, because they operated at a higher frequency. So even if they would exhibit the symptom for a while, it would be then processed, digested, alchemized, or spit out through their own system. And again, body, mind, spirit system. And that was then reflected in your experience. And it's absolutely mind-blowing how the more contemporary healing modalities you know, and this was my experience, because just as you, I had my own healing journey and my own researching into and learning and studying many different psychotherapy modalities, and each of them worked for me to some extent, but none of them really nailed it until I discovered hypnotherapy, and then went beyond hypnotherapy in a comparable way that is reflected in your story as well. And I guess it's inevitable to get to the conclusion that pretty much everything that we are experiencing today as healing modalities have the seed, the origin in the ancient teachings and healing and spiritual advancement practices of the Egyptians that inherited them from Lemuria and Atlantis, and the Egyptians who then passed it down to the Essenes, and the Essenes passed it down to, well, the mystics, the Gnostics, and so on and so forth. And it was carried across by the esoteric schools, the mystery schools, and kept separated from the mainstream institutionalized religion, that although they and many knew and were aware of these sacred teachings and healing modalities, but they were reserved to the let's say closed circle. And we are coming back right now to exactly the origin of it all, and coming back to the conclusion that it's time to dig out and bring into the light this sacred teachings, and actually acknowledge that a lot of what it is psychotherapy and healing modality today, which in a way Jung was a precursor of all, well, not only Jung, we had Rudolf Steiner as well much earlier. It really goes back to the sacred teachings and of the ancient civilizations. And again, I'm fascinated by your ability to bring together so much information and so much skills, not just information, and skills and tools. And I know you also embed secret geometry in your work. And another interesting thing that both of us, and then we have some other friends who operate in the same rainbow zone as us, we downloaded, there is no better word. Yeah, we were inspired to create different modalities and techniques that have the principle of the rainbow light embedded in it. And I'm sure there are many others all over the world who just get this sort of insights and create new modalities that are not new, but are we are given the chance to rediscover and to embody and to bring forth these ancient teachings. And you have a very credible way of doing that, because you can truly use a scientific language and explain why it works. And on that note, I mean, I know you have many, many fascinating cases, but I would be curious if you can give us an example or several examples about, let's say, your most challenging cases or your most, fascinating cases.
Most challenging, I'd have to say the most challenging cases, and challenging isn't the right word per se, as much as it is the cases that require more time, more energy, more support, is sexual trauma. I work heavily. I would venture, if I were to statistically figure it out, at least 95 to 97% of my client caseload have experienced sexual trauma. And it's such a taboo subject that, and a lot of my clients don't even realize those experiences were sexual trauma. So they're not challenging as much in the word, like the way we understand challenge in this world, but it's almost more of a challenge to kind of get them to understand that what you experienced was abuse, was trauma, and to walk somebody through the, de-gaslighting of self, because people that experience that sexual trauma, whether it's, an adult man looking at you in an uncomfortable or a way that makes you uncomfortable, even though there's not the act of sexual touching, that does consist of sexual trauma because of the way the body recognizes I'm being objectified. So the most challenging would be that dynamic, just because of the amount of time and care and compassion that goes into it. I've kind of really transitioned in my business. I do still do kind of those one-off sessions if people have minor issues they want to look at. But a bulk of my one-on-one work, I encourage people to commit to a program of, usually about 9 months, so that we can really get to a depth of healing that is required. Most fascinating cases are always the spiritually rooted ones. They'll come in kind of basic problems, sleep, anxiety, depression, and we go through a session and all of a sudden they're regressing to past lifetimes. A lot of them, of course, go back to the witch days and being burned at the stake and being, I hold that perspective. They didn't burn witches, they burned women. And we heal that, we heal that stigma around being a witch because it's not a bad thing. Other kind of fascinating ones, a lot of them that start going back and recalling the ancient Egyptian times, as well as the Essene times. Those, and I don't know that I'd necessarily say they are the most fascinating, but they hold so much in my heart, because when they're going back to those times, I'm with them. Usually I remember it already. But as they start speaking about stuff, I remember. And that's kind of been in my own healing as well. It's the spontaneous remembrances of soul experiences and, coming in contact with somebody as a client, kind of similar to you and I. We met and it was just like we both felt that there's a connection here, but we know what it is, but is it safe to say what it is? And then anybody that has an oversoul connected to the Order of the Blue Rose, I can pick up on it instantaneously. It takes one gaze at a person, one phone call, feeling their energy, and I know. So those are the ones that, because every time I do that, I know as I'm working through healing whatever it is in this Blue Rose lineage, it is not affecting just that client. It is affecting everybody that carries that in their energetic field, that has that soul imprint, and it is bringing back what has always resided within us, male and female, and allowing us to reconnect to the true nature of ourselves and recognizing we're not separate from God creator. We are that individualized aspect of said God creator, universe, divine, whatever kind of fits your belief structure. But that so I guess that's kind of my most fascinating, as far as there's so many cases. I can't, just pinpoint one, but it is the Blue Rose Order ones. They hit me in a way that, it brings emotion to me almost every time, because it's every time I work with a client, whether they know it or not, it's healing something in me, because it's allowing me to reclaim that this is real, and what they experienced in their life, being able to see them let those trauma responses and those masks go, and re-embodying the authenticity and the purity and the truth of who they are, and stepping out of fear, no longer walking through this world as if they're thinking they're crazy or something's wrong with them, but really being able to show up. It's so healing. No session that I do is truly an individual session. It always has a trickle effect. It will affect parents, it will affect kids, it will affect aunts, uncles, the whole bloodline. You know, it affects the neighbor. It affects, anybody you walk into across in the streets. You change your vibration that you're carrying. So every person you come in contact with are being exposed to a healed vibration, making it easier and easier for them to step into that themselves. And, it's in order for us to go through that ascension and unity process, it takes a collective work, but that collective work happens on that individual level. And the more we're safe within ourselves to look within, healing just, it happens so much quicker and so much more rapid for everyone.
Yeah, and it's fascinating that um, you brought this sort of cluster of experiences, of healing experiences, because I mean, you and I both work a lot with therapists and with people who studied many healing modalities, and yet they still experience that hesitation or that block to either move into their purpose and their practice, or to actually expand and come out of the spiritual closet and out of their self-imposed prison of, oh, I don't want to look woo-woo, I don't want to talk about spiritual things. And then you and I are flagging the flag with pride and delight and joy, because I mean, I know for both of us, this is what made the difference between wandering around and not really knowing what are we going to do with ourselves and with the gifts that we felt that we have, and really stepping into living our purpose. And uh, in my case, people often say, oh, you have a psychology degree, of course it's easy for you to be successful because of all that knowledge. And in your case, you have a medical degree, let alone that you study theocentric psychology. So I mean, I know from the outside people would say, you have all this, you were lucky or privileged or whatever, you got to have these qualifications, and that's what makes you successful. But actually what makes us successful and real in our work, it's exactly what you said earlier. It's our own healing that continues, that never stops, because there's no such a thing as 100% healed human. And going back to therapists and aspiring therapists, that is also one of the issues most encountered, and also what's most fascinating for me, just as for you, is getting to that past life where they were hunted as witches, burnt, drowned, persecuted, which comes back today in a form of fear of visibility, fear of showing up. And it looks like it's a minor thing, and it's so not minor. It's deeply rooted in ourselves, that fear, the persecution. And once you get to the actual root cause, as Dr. Stanislav Grof would call it, the coexistence, because it's like a cluster of experiences of persecution that started with maybe the Essenes times, maybe after the crucifixion, maybe in all those the reincarnations throughout time, throughout the medieval times, and it's still reflected today. And it's through the kind of work that you do that we really get to the root cause, and that's released for the whole transgenerational line. And there is collective trauma into that, and there is collective healing, as you were saying, the rippling effect that comes with raising the frequency. And I know you really enjoy your work, and it's like it's your mission, it's your life, it's who you are. Uh, but I would like to ask you, what are your challenges as a therapist and as a teacher? Because you are a teacher, you are a consciousness leader yourself. What are your challenges, and how do you work with that?
Um, my biggest challenge is, because of the neurotype that I have, um, the way in which I create and the way in which I exist in the world does not look anything like what we're societally programmed and taught with. So my biggest challenge is always having to remind myself that it is going to appear different in how this happens. And in most cases, it will be very misunderstood or not understood at all by, other people. So kind of, for example, is I will go very long periods of time where I'm completely inactive in the creation department, where it's not autopilot per se, but I'm just, 9 months to 2 years of nothing new, just, showing up, doing the work with my clients. And then after that very prolonged period of hibernation, I get into creation mode. And when I get into that creation mode, what I can produce and what comes out, it's beyond. Multidimensional hypnotherapy, Rainbow Reiki, and Trinity Wellness Collective, or what Trinity Wellness Therapy, that was truly created in a matter of 2 months. And I had all of the material eh, written, typed out, ready to launch out into the world. And it's like in the long grand scheme of things, it's going to be a 2 to 3 year program and training that people will go through. And it took me about 2 months to create the whole thing. But it sounds great and wonderful, but the self-imposed, there's something wrong with me. I'm not producing. I'm, the executive dysfunction. Um, and self-care can become very challenging for me because of that, my neurotype. When I get into that creation mode, I don't see anything other than tunnel vision of what I'm creating, and I will go through processes where I forget to eat, I forget to drink water, I struggle to shower. I have to have, my partner, thank God I have her, because she becomes that place of support where gives me those needed reminders sometimes. And then, when I kind of get out of that creative window and I go into that resting state, the stepping out of the self-judgment and shaming myself and guilting myself, removing that belief that I'm lazy because I'm not able to be functioning the way I could when I was in that extreme creative process. It's very different than the manic state that the mental health world tried to impose on me and what was happening. So it's taking everything that I was told I was and understanding that they didn't actually know what was going on.
And it was nothing pathological about it. It's
Right.
how you function, and
Right.
it's a gift and a joy, and I mean, I know your capacity to create. It's absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah. And obviously I am no different than other people. I have had my struggles with imposter syndrome, and I've really had to work on that because, I do have the certifications and the credentials and the fancy letters, but the way in which I acquired those were outside of the stereotypical westernized norm. I didn't go through a traditional 4 year university college. I didn't go on to, get a master's in social work or, therapy in the traditional sense. So I really had to work through that because I was like a lot of people. I don't have the degree to be a therapist. And then, what really helped me with that was recognizing, people that are massage therapists have no issue calling themselves therapists. It's just in a different sense of the word. And they did go through the education they needed to be that and to do that. But that imposter syndrome, I still shows up today, even though when I look at all that I have created and the work that I do and the people that I help, there are those moments where I'm kind of backpedaling and it's like, who am I to be doing this? And having to go within and find that strength and rely on my spiritual support team to kind of walk me through that and pull myself out of that rut, because you can get stuck in it. And I did get stuck in it for a while. So yeah.
And we were discussing this with other therapists and also in the intervision group, is like the most qualified, the most equipped with knowledge and skills and wide perspective on what healing actually means. So really the most educated and skilled and competent therapists I know struggle with imposter syndrome and have to keep themselves in check. And there was one thing that we were discussing in the intervision group, the ideas of how to remind yourself of who you are and how much you have done until today. I know you have your folder with all
Oh
your
yeah.
diplomas, and we were discussing with another colleague that she needs to take a photo on her wall of fame and post all her certificates on that wall to actually remind yourself. And again, it's not about the certificates. They bring a certain validation or credibility more like for the external eyes, but it's how long and what did it take you to get here in terms of your own healing and your own self-awareness? Because everything you are talking about now, it's self-awareness. You know where you can fall when you are under stress, when we are simply depleted because of your way of functioning. And again, the gift that I see in that is the fact that you had to find ways of learning very different than the neurotypical kids, and you had to find ways that work for you, and there was nobody there to hold your hand and tell you this is how you can do it, because this simply didn't exist. And you are the one who are able now to hold others neurodivergent people and young people and people of all ages and kids, um, and actually show them and teach them and model it for them, that it's not only okay to be who they are, but it's magnificent to be who they are, and with their capacity to create and to understand and to learn. Because the word gifted is in no way pejorative. It's truly gifted, and having a higher intelligence and a different way of operating than the mainstream. And that's huge, that you can bring into this world the permission to be, and not just to be, but to be successful and to do it your way, and to bring a really meaningful contribution to this world where more and more kids are neurodivergent. So what does this tell us? Because to me, this is next step evolutionary. This is the more advanced brain, but we pathologize it because we don't have all the mainstream medical system or psychiatric system pathologizes it because it doesn't have any better lenses. It doesn't have the theories to explain it. And until they will be born, people have to live their lives and actually function in a society that is not designed for them. And this is where you bring something really unique with your understanding of how the body works, how the nervous system works, how you need to feed yourself, how you need to understand your needs for rest, for work, for play, which are different. They are simply different. And you have to allow it.
And I love that you bring this up because it is, a lot of these children that are being born now in our society, they're coming in and they're the kind of veil over their consciousness. All children are born with a very thin veil, but these children that are being born, their veil is practically non-existent. And that's how I was born. I was born and there wasn't a thick veil over my consciousness. And at a very young age realized, I see, feel, and experience things different, but that kind of giftedness that I possessed as a child became a place of abuse and trauma. For those young gifted children that are asking these questions that are really deep questions, are incredibly triggering and for the adults around them, for two reasons. Number one, these adults don't even have these questions populating in their own mind. So, how dare this child question my, authority because they're thinking of a question that isn't even percolating in my own mind. And then, second with that is they can't answer the question. So simply this child bringing up these questions of these such deep things, or, expressing something that hasn't crossed the mind of that adult, it doesn't go, in most cases, the adult doesn't go, oh, let me self-reflect and find this answer. It goes into a projection of what's wrong with you? Why would you ask that question? Why do you think that? So that's growing up for me. I experienced that a lot. And that's kind of the mission I've had with my own kids is I will not tell them anything is their imagination. They're coming to me and they're saying, oh, mom, Nana was here last night. And obviously, my mom's passed away. Yeah, I bet she was. What did she have to say? And when they talk about the dragons, or they talk about seeing my youngest son, he has a very strong connection to Archangel Michael, and he'll talk about, well, yeah, Archangel Michael came to daddy's with me, and yeah, I bet he was there. And did you feel safe? And did he help protect you? And, you know, we allow that in our household because um, everything in our reality, it was formulated by a thought. It was formulated by our imagination. And this is our society starting to open up more and more to this, but this is none of it's new. You know, you look at, like you had mentioned earlier, Rudolf Steiner, like the Waldorf method and all of those different ways of teaching. This has been around for a really long time, and it's formative and it's foundational. And um, I feel it's a necessity for our educational systems to have a complete overhaul and revamp at this point in society and a restructuring. You know, I can look at the way in which the educational system and model was based in Lumerian times. It fascinates me, and I, you know, believe that's how our world needs to be again. You know, when peers or, you know, children got in kind of trouble in the school system back in the Lumerian times, it wasn't the teachers or the adults that would implement the disciplinary action or figure out the solution to the problem. It was their peers, you know, and the peers had the desire to, they wanted to learn because they were allowed to learn what they wanted to. They weren't boxed in and forced to learn things that did not resonate with their soul. And this, you know, I believe education is important, absolutely. But this well-rounded education is detrimental to the neurodivergent brain because these students go through that system, and if their brain is not wired to learn the mechanics of something, if they're not a mathematical person, they're going to form those beliefs that they're stupid and they're lazy and think there's something wrong with them, when in fact they're the most intelligent, most brilliant, you know, revolutionary souls on our planet that are here to make change. But they're being programmed with there's something wrong with them because they don't understand in the way that, you know, their neurotypical peers are. So, you know, with
Yeah.
my kids, my younger two, I've pulled them out of the public school system and they go through a private homeschooling program where, you know, yes, they learn their reading, they learn their math, but a bulk of their days is spent exploratively playing and learning. And what I've seen in my children's behaviors and their imagination and the things that my daughter creates out of nothing. It's, you know, I see a piece of paper and she makes it into this elaborate thing. And that was never fostered in my education. Like you had said, it was necessary for me to figure out my way of learning. I was getting in so much trouble in my teenage years. You know, I was put into institutions because my parents couldn't control me. And um, ultimately, that led to me being placed in what's called an alternative school. And in that school, you know, they handed me my textbook and they said, here, you know, and here's your assignments. And there was no teacher at the front of the classroom telling me how to do it. It was me figuring it out. And in me figuring it out and self teaching, I learned so much quicker, so much easier. And what happens with these neurodivergent children when there's a teacher in the front of the classroom, their brain doesn't know how to filter out the irrelevant sensory information the way their peers do. So if that teacher is talking up there, but the air vent's going and there's people talking in the hallway and little Tommy up there's tapping his pen, there's all these sound waves in blocking that teacher's voice. They really truly can't hear it. And it's not a matter of them having bad hearing. It's that they have superior hearing and they're hearing everything. You know, they're seeing everything. They're not tunnel visioned into the whiteboard or the, you know, the chalkboard. They're seeing the bird fly through the window. They're seeing little Sally's twirling her hair, and it's too much sensory information. You know, these neurodivergent brains, they come in operating at 40 times the speed of a neurotypical brain, which is why I talk so fast. And if a teacher up there is monotone and slow and talking like this, a neurodivergent brain will not be engaged because their brain is thinking 100 times faster. You know, it's not 100, but 40 times faster is this.
And processing 40 times more. I mean,
Yeah.
well, that wouldn't be a percentage that I would use with a lot of certainty, but it's like so many more times faster and much more information being processed, which is why the subtlety of the conclusions, the subtlety of the analysis, the thinking out of the box. And I just think it's so validating for your kids, the way you raise them. And it's only because the word imagination has such a bad reputation, because, and I'm always amused, and I know you know this, I'm amused on the reaction of our hypnotherapist colleagues whenever I say who they mostly don't want to sound woo-woo, and they wouldn't talk about necessarily about expanded states of consciousness and spiritual guidance. And I know they are on one hand shocked and on another hand relieved to hear that Carl Gustav Jung, he had spirit guides. He created a process called active imagination. He was proudly using the word imagination, which is essentially shamanic journeying. And this was his process of psyche exploration, and a process through which he created, by accessing higher wisdom, by talking to his spirit guides. He had two spirit guides. Well, he had more, but there were two more constant, present in his life, in his visions, Salome and Philemon, if I remember correctly. And they were helping, just as you downloaded to a large extent your incredible healing method, the multidimensional hypnotherapy and rainbow Reiki. That's how he downloaded his system of thought, the depth psychology, the notion of archetypes that everyone now knows. It's so mainstream, the notion of archetypes, the individuation process, all his key concepts, the psyche structure, his psyche structure, which is different than Freud's, as he acknowledges the existence of a collective unconscious, which is what we tap in. And maybe you want to call it what's the word, Akashic records, and it's still tapping into that collective unconscious where a wealth of information resides, and where a lot of healing resides. So I think it's people are afraid of being called unscientific or pseudoscience, but it's just because they actually have limited information and limited knowledge. Because, and I'm sure you read, there is a book written by, I think his name is David Hamilton, that it's called Why Woo-Woo Works. And it's funny, his choice of words is funny, but he's actually highlighting that there is science behind all that. There is science and sacred geometry behind your rainbow Reiki. And you only need to find that language, as Dr. Joe Dispenza says, science gives a language to demystify the miracle. And that is exactly what you do. And no surprise that your training program takes 9 months and it's probably expanding, although you downloaded it in such a concentrated period of time, and because that's how you function, and you have to function like this, which is differently than the neurotypical people, to be able to bring to creation, to fruition, what you are able to bring.
I love that you highlight that too, because that's so imperative for children that are neurodivergent, is to have support that understands that. And this happens a lot in my career. I have, parents will reach out to me and, well, my child's really struggling with this, can you work with them? And I never say no by any means. I'm open and willing to work with these kids, but in every single case, almost always, I tell the parents, first and foremost, I will work with your child if they want it, if they're open to it and they want this. I will not do it if they don't want to, because that's not going to do any benefit to anyone. And with every case, I always too, if your child is going to go through a healing process and working with me, you as their parent, one, if not both of you, need to go through it as well. So you understand what is happening. And a lot of times what I see happen is when I have a parent go through the process, all of a sudden they understand something. They're showing up differently as a parent. They're, accepting their child in a way that they never have before, because the unacceptance that they had was rooted in their own trauma. And all of a sudden,
and it's psychoeducation also, that they simply need to learn and understand themselves, because the mind needs to understand too.
Yeah, absolutely. And more times than not, I don't end up even working with that child, because then things are better at home, because mom, dad, these adults that are leading the family, they're healing. If they're healing, that trickle effect down to their children, and their children don't need to heal. The problems they're having with their kids is those trauma responses of their own. And it's always rooted in, I wasn't allowed to display this characteristic or behavior or trait, so I can't allow my child to. and now my child's defiant, or whatever. Neurodivergency is about as genetic as hair color and eye color. It's almost unheard of that you will have a neurotypical parent and a neurodivergent child. um, they say
Yeah.
birds of a feather flock together. It's the same.
Yeah.
If you're neurodivergent, chances are the people that are closest to you in life, that you feel closest and connected to, they're neurodivergent as well. And I'm a
Yeah.
firm believer that in order to really go through a healing process, if you identify as someone that is neurodivergent, it's imperative to work with somebody that they themselves are neurodivergent as well, because it's a lived experience that unless you have it, you can't understand it. The same thing with HSPs. If your therapist is not highly sensitive, how can they truly help you with coping skills to accommodate the sensitivities you possess if their coping skill is, well, just don't worry about that? Well, they don't have a choice. They can't not worry, and
Yeah.
so it's important to find
Yeah.
the therapist the same way a regular doctor. If you don't feel a connection with them in that soul based level, you're not going to achieve the healing that you're seeking.
Yeah. Drop the perfectionism. I can't drop the perfectionism. That's how it's designed. And it's, yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. Fascinating how powerful it is just validating someone's experience that is different, how much healing that is. And as you know very well, this is also, as your mission is, well, you have quite a few missions, but one of them is really normalizing the experience of being neurodivergent, just as one of my missions is normalizing the experience of being an HSP, a highly sensitive person. And I see how people come, highly sensitive people come to me with a request, I want to change. I want to be more organized. I want to be more effective. I want to be more productive. And they already are 10 times more productive than their neurotypical person. It's just that they hold themselves to impossible standards and they judge themselves, and they have to deal with all that overwhelm that you very well explain why the overwhelm, because they receive all that. It's like a radar that is like this in terms of receiving information, while the neurotypical is like this, and the brain doesn't have the capacity to filter out. So hence the overwhelm, not because you are lazy, not because you are whatever labels they learned to put on themselves. And I wanted to ask you also, what is you were one of those who joined me in the intervision group from the very beginning, and I was so excited and so thrilled to have you in the group, because the power of the intervision program is in bringing different therapists together with all these different orientations. And somehow it happened that one of the subgroups is more, let's say, working more in a mainstream way. So using a more, let's say more, yeah, mainstream accepted and known psychotherapy modalities. And then there is the other group where you are part of, and it just happened to be like this as things align, where there are more spiritually oriented and open therapists. And I have to say, we have amazing discussions in both groups. And to me, it is now my greatest joy to run the intervision group program. So would you like to say a few words about your experience as part of the intervision for those who might be curious? Why would they want to join a program like that? What's in there for you as a therapist, especially if you are an experienced one like you?
So when I had first joined, obviously when you first put it out, it was more of that kind of mainstream clinical support where there's the, consulting on challenges and cases and having different perspectives, or, that's, why I joined, was to have that. But like you said, how it organically just came together, that the group I'm in was far more spiritually rooted. The amount of, I don't say validation in the way that of an ego rooted way, but the validation it provided me to really truly trust my intuition, and showing up as a therapist, as myself, because obviously when I bring my cases, I get that feedback, but what I really appreciate is when other people have their cases and they start speaking on it. And what comes to me when they're talking of like, well, this, you know, and then for me, that's just how my brain's always thought, you know. So I've always associated that with normalcy because it's normal for me. But then I start speaking and present, or you know, sharing different ideas or different things, and the feedback from, you know, whoever brought the case, uh, the gratitude and thankfulness that they have that, you know, I presented this perspective, um, that has been so profound for me because it's given me so much confidence in trusting what I know and trusting what comes to me. Because again, as a little girl, the questions I had, the things I thought, they were wrong. It was always wrong. You know, I don't know how many times as a child, an adolescent, and even a young adult, I would say something or present some form of information. And the rebuttal I would get was, well, I've never heard of that. So that must not be true. And it's like, just because you haven't heard of something doesn't mean it's not true. And, um, you know, so I really, my entire life struggled to acknowledge my own intelligence. And this gave me the ability to accept that, which truly was rooted so deeply in trauma. And having a collective of people where I can show up 100% authentic. I don't mask anything. I don't hold anything back. You know, if somebody's talking about something and I get an intuitive hit about it, I don't keep it in the back of my mind as that's an internal thought that I need to keep in. You know, I now know when those very strong intuitive hits come, especially if I know that's something directly from spirit, I know that's coming to me because this person likely needs to hear that and spirit wants that to be given to them. Um, and then, you know, in the same capacity, there are times where I miss something, you know, there's a perspective I don't see, and the group provides me a perspective that can help me in the same way with my clients when I get stuck. And again, it's just that place of support where every time you go, you know you're going to leave feeling recharged. You're never feeling tired. You're never feeling depleted. It's such a safe container where, you know, we all respect each other's energy and we fill each other up. Nobody's draining anyone. Nobody's, you know, taking anything from anyone. And that's such a challenge for people that are neurodivergent without them even knowing how easily their energy is being, you know, sucked out of them. And, you know, that's just the sounding board, everything about it. It puts you in contact with people that if it weren't for technology, you know, I never would have met anybody that's in the inner vision group. Because
Yeah.
again, it it expanded my world in a way that again, I'm in a small town in the US, the very conservative, red tape. It's, you know, the way in which I think and experience the world. Had I not had this group, I don't know how I would have ever truly got into the place of self acceptance. You know, there's a few people and there's more coming out of the woodwork now. But when this really all started for me, there was only one other person I knew locally that I could be fully authentic with. And that's not enough. It's, you know,
Yeah.
1 to 2 good friends is great. But when it comes to this stuff in the way society has shamed that lived experience, um, this
To
made it
have a
so much easier
professional
to heal.
community that actually, and it's very interesting and very like validating for me also because that you being a very experienced and multifaceted therapist yourself, that you get this benefit out of the group, because I'm always saying that this is a massive benefit for the beginners, because as they are invited to give feedback to other people's cases, and we all have our blind spots. We all have our blind spots, yeah? But when you look at someone else's case, you are very clear-minded, you're not subjectively attached, you're not emotionally attached to the outcome. So you see very clear, and when you receive the feedback that your feedback was very meaningful and really touching a key point, it's very validating for you. And as a beginner who didn't have that much client experience, that's very much reinforcing the fact that you are more than ready to step into your purpose. You are more than ready to start getting paid clients. And that's what I usually tell when junior therapists ask, yeah, but you know, I don't have that many clients, so I don't know if it makes sense to join. It makes sense to join exactly because
Yeah.
it gives you a sense of where you are, position you in front of in your own eyes, to how much you actually know and how capable you are to handle cases. But it's even more significant for me that you were saying that. And I mean, I can totally testify on how deeply intuitive and significant your interventions are. Like one of your similar interventions you were telling me when we were discussing about the shamanic journeying,
Mhm.
you were telling me you have to do a journey for Romania, which is my country of origin, with which I had a what I call a love and hate relationship. And I would have never thought of that. And it was an intuitive hit that you received, because if you ask me, I feel like, yeah, I pretty much resolved my trauma that has to do with my country of origin and my relationship with it. And it was a mind-blowing, powerful healing journey of a parallel aspect of the country, of the trauma and the karma that is collective trauma
Yeah.
and assumed transgenerational karma. And it was also a powerful healing for that version of me that still lives there, because we know we are multidimensional. It's not just what we have now on the screen. So yeah, this kind of insights that you have in your very unique way, and I'm very grateful for the fact that you feel free to just share it in the group. It led many times to many people in the group having very powerful experiences and opening routes for them then that wouldn't have been open otherwise. So
Yeah.
yeah.
You know, I didn't mention this, but I feel it's an important aspect of it too, because as a therapist, you know, if this is the career path you're choosing, you need to make money to survive. And the support I received in it, I have and continue to receive in the intervision group gave me the confidence within myself to be comfortable with charging for what I do. That is such a huge thing in the therapist, healer, shamanic world, is that interwoven stigma between charging for your services and being a support to humanity. And you know, obviously my one-on-one work with you helped tremendously with that as well, but the group, you know, when I was able to start recognizing, you know, other people's gifts and their abilities to heal, and was thinking like, oh my gosh, you should be charging this, you know, and having that perspective about them, it was such a blinding bright light mirror where I was like, if you can recognize that in them, that service, that skill that they have, and this is what you think they should be charging, why am I not doing the same? You know, and that led to me being able to get to a state of acceptance and understanding, you know, and identifying my worth and my value, and um, really radically changed my understanding of money and how money operates and what money really is. You know, money beliefs are such a integral part of healing, and it's one of the most avoided topics, and that's part of, you know, the work I do too with my clients is, if you're not willing to look at your money beliefs, I'm probably not the therapist for you, because that's
Yeah.
such a huge, you know, it's
Money is
money,
safety,
sex,
money
and
is
religion.
survival, money is
Yep.
worthiness, money is so, and it's energy. It's we are talking about energy. If we don't master energy by now, it's time to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So, Chelsey, this has been a fascinating talk, and I'm sure you'll be back in some time with your new creations, because you are an endless, powerful powerhouse creator. The vocabulary doesn't have enough words to to reflect what you bring into the world. Any final thoughts, final words, particularly to people who are, let's say, who are on their own healing journey and they studied many therapy modalities, just as we were at some point, and still have hesitations about moving into their purpose. What would you say?
Shadow work and soul work. If you've studied multiple different modalities and you're still in that kind of him hawn state of, I don't have enough, I need to learn more, you're at the point where it's time to do that shadow work. It's time to look at those perceived ugly, dark parts of yourself and accept them, bring them back in, because in that shadow aspect is where your strongest spiritual abilities, gifts reside. And without doing the healing around that, and without transcending from your human ego self to the soul level work, you're never going to stop acquiring trainings and classes and courses. And, I can say without a shadow of a doubt, I will be a forever student. I am a teacher, but I will always be a forever student. And it's not rooted in trauma anymore. I can say that because I love to learn. So that brings me joy. I'm no longer learning to validate what I'm doing. I'm learning because it brings me happiness and hearing different perspectives. And that doesn't mean everything I learn or take in, I apply. Some of it I'm like, okay, well, I probably didn't need to take that training, but whatever. But for those that are stuck in that loop of courses and classes and self-investment and personal development, um, there doesn't come a stopping point per se in a healing journey. I'm a firm believer that if you stick with the healing journey long enough, it will transition into a spiritual journey. And once it's at that point, it turns into growth. You're no longer healing, you're growing. And if you're stuck in that cycle, you're keeping yourself from stepping foot into that spiritual development side. It's important to be kind of quote unquote successful. You have to have the mental, emotional, spiritual intelligence. And, not to say that you absolutely have to, but a well rounded, successful person possesses all three and invests in all three. So if you're only looking at your intellectual development and learning, but you're neglecting your physical well being and completely separating from your spiritual well being, you're never going to get the results that you're seeking because you're still fragmenting yourself. And in order to heal, we need to be whole, which means we need to have the Trinity approach of mind, body, and spirit.
And that's what you offer. That's what you
Yes.
offer in everything that you do. And that's also what you really, truly embody
Mm-hmm.
in who you are.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much, Chelsey. This has been a fabulous, fantastic, inspirational talk.
Yeah.
And we'll see you back in the Intervision group.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. And if
Thank
anyone's
you.
interested and wanting to reach out, Heartfelt Healing Hypnotherapy.com is my website. So if you want to attach that to the comments of this.
Yes, everything will be attached and linked below under the video so that people know where to find you and where they can study with you some of the most revolutionary healing methods on the planet right now.
Thank you. Appreciate your love and support and can't wait to see how things grow.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.